Thanks, everybody, so much for being here today. I'm here. We've got Chad Warmington he's president and CEO of the State Chamber. Thanks so much for being here, Chad. Sharpest dressed man in Oklahoma there. We have Secretary of Education Ryan Walters with us, and Steve Harp, our State Chief Operating Officer. You know, from the beginning, we've made it clear that schools need to be open for in-person learning. Oklahoma students deserve that option, being in person, in class, with their teachers. You know, I want to publicly thank the schools, the teachers, for doing their part, for doing everything they can to provide in-person learning for kids across the state. Most schools in Oklahoma are currently open, and I've heard from concerned Oklahomans who recognize that the past few weeks have really created some new challenges. Many schools don't have the staff or the substitutes to actually fill every single classroom. Students, you know, they deserve and they need that right for in-person education. The state has a responsibility to ensure that those students do have that right, and that remains intact, that they have in-person learning options. We know how damaging it can be for kids, for their academic performance. We've seen that over the last couple years, for the mental health of young people when schools are closed down for an extended period of time. That's why today I'm announcing an executive order to help all of our schools across the state. I'm authorizing the state agencies to allow their employees to help keep kids in school by substitute teaching all across the state. Secretary Walters will work with school officials, administrators, to get this implemented across the state. The core mission of all of our 32,000 state employees is to serve the public and to help make Oklahoma a top 10 state. Throughout the pandemic, we've seen state employees, they've answered the call, they've switched and moved to different state agencies where we needed help at that specific time. And right now, that means stepping up to help our schools. So I'm asking all state employees to see what they can do because in-person learning is so important for the future of that specific child, but also for the state of Oklahoma. I'm encouraging everyone in our different communities around the state to reach out to the local school district and find out what they can do to help. And maybe that is substituting. So let's come together. We're going to think outside the box, and we're going to help keep 100% of our schools open across the state of Oklahoma. With that, I'll turn it over now to Chad Warmington, the State Chamber President, to give you an update from the business community's perspective. Chad?
Thank you, Governor. It's a pleasure to be here today. Look, we all know that school closures really negatively impact the economy in both the short and the long term. Various global studies and national studies have concluded that students that are out of school have a long-term reduction in their earning power and in their potential long-term reduction in the overall GDP of the nation. More immediately, school closures exacerbate the labor shortage that businesses are already grappling with as employees have to stay home from work to handle their children's school closure issues. And so we believe that employees have valuable skills that can be brought to the classroom to support students in schools. So today, the State Chamber is announcing an initiative called the Guest Educator Program to help fill the gap that districts grappling with staff shortages due to COVID-19. But frankly, this program can continue on for not just for now, but in the future as well. Our immediate goal with the Guest Educator Program is to make businesses aware of the role that they can play in ensuring that students are able to continue learning in their classrooms and to help them understand the relatively simple process that's there to make themselves available to their local school districts. We believe it's good for the community, it's good for the kids, and it's definitely good for business. Additionally, what we really hope is that this program will help build the long-term relationship and partnership between local businesses and schools, and subject matter experts could be available to work in classrooms that would pay dividends to educating students on the future workforce needs of the state of Oklahoma. In fact, Senator Jessica Garvin has some legislation this year filed to help with adjunct and highly qualified substitute teachers. That really speaks to some of that as well. So we'll be working with her on that. And so there's been pockets of success over the years where schools have partnered with businesses, but we hope that this point in time, we can really strengthen those partnerships between industry and schools and to help turn the corner on some of the workforce issues that we're having. So it's not a quick fix. This is a collaborative approach, and it's a long-term approach that'll involve parents, the business community, the education system. But we believe that if the guest educator program works, businesses will be more empowered to match up willing employees of theirs with a school district in their area to help fill the needs. And so they can visit okguesteducator.com. There they'll find a portal where you can find a school district and the contact information to help match up your employees with a school that needs it. And it's a relatively simple process. Most of them just require a background check. But again, working with your local school, you can figure out what the requirements that they may have as well. So I really want to encourage businesses across the state to look into and join the guest educator program. I want us to rally together to keep schools open, keep kids learning, and keep parents working. Thank you very much.
From the day that the governor appointed me as Secretary of Education in the middle of the pandemic, I began hearing from parents all across the state and students that were asking for in-person learning. They wanted that option for their kids. And so from the very beginning, the governor and I have always talked about what can we do that's in the best interest of Oklahoma students. We've seen throughout the pandemic the negative health impacts when it comes to the mental health of a young person, when it comes to the academics of young people that do not have in-person school. So we have been working to keep schools open from day one so that our students have that option. I want to, again, like the governor, publicly thank our teachers who have been stretched so thin, doing all they can to keep our schools open for our young people. And I want to thank so many administrators around the state who have explored all options to keep schools open. Thank you for what you're doing for our young people. Thank you for what you're doing for your communities. I asked last week that all administrators and communities do all they can to keep schools open. I met with school teachers last week. I met with school leaders, and what they kept bringing up was the need for substitute teachers, that teachers need help to cover their classes so that teachers can continue teaching. I want to thank Governor Stitt and Chad Wormington from the State Chamber, moving quickly to find ways that we can bring more human capital to our schools so that teachers get that help that they need. I want to continue to ask communities and administrators to do all they can to assist our teachers so that parents can know Oklahoma schools are going to stay open and your children will be able to continue in-person learning. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the COO, Steve Hart.
Good afternoon. My comments will be brief. The state of Oklahoma has been through this before, at least in terms of operations. During the early days of COVID, we mobilized several hundred employees to serve at different locations. So, for example, State Department of Health, we had employees also at OESC during our crisis with unemployment. We've had a great turnout from our employees in terms of their ability to rally around these causes, and we think we're going to do the same thing here. So very fortunate today that we have the state in such a great location and in a situation as the governor's put us operationally. So now that we feel like we can come up with some labor to offset some of these needs in the schools with substitute teachers. We're imploring that all directors in state agencies as well as employees will now know that they can sign up, and we'll be working that process internally through OMES. But we're looking forward to getting more community activity through our employees into the schools to help offset this problem. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the governor.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Secretary. Thanks, Chad. And again, just to echo, I thank the schools, the teachers for doing everything they can to provide that in-person learning for students that's we know is so critical. And again, just encourage all Oklahomans across the state of Oklahoma to do what they can to maybe help substitute. If you've never substituted before, to volunteer in your school district, and let's get through this together. If it's just for a few days, we know we can make a big difference, and that's why we were thinking outside the box here to roll this out for our state employees. So thanks again for being here today, and we'll open it up for a few questions for myself and the team that's here.
Governor, how quickly will this happen, and have any state agencies signed up already?
Well, the executive order is being done today, and Secretary Walters, you may take that. How quickly will they get out?
Yeah, this will be as soon as possible. We'll have the executive order out today, and we'll be moving to get employees volunteered up, ready to go. So,
Tomorrow. We expect it. We expect state employees to be mobilized tomorrow and be reaching out for the school districts. That's our intent. And then, Chad, with the business community, you're rolling out today, and you're expecting businesses around the state to start volunteering.
COVID-19 is the cause of these staff shortages. Why do none of these solutions attempt to slow the spread of COVID?
Well, we've got record cases right now in the state of Oklahoma. The Omicron is sweeping across the state of Oklahoma. It's sweeping across the United States. This is actually our third surge, and it's the highest peak we've had, just like every single other state. So regardless of policy and what any state has done, every state has seen COVID positives go up. The good news with Omicron is it doesn't seem to be as dangerous as far as going to the hospital. Our hospital numbers are not as high as they were back in January. I just got off a phone call with an update from our health department, and 40 to 45% of our hospitalizations with COVID are there with COVID, not because of COVID. So in other words, because Omicron is so infectious, everybody that goes to the hospital, whether it's for a broken leg or any other issue, they're being tested, and up to 45% of those are testing positive, but they're there actually in the hospital for a certain thing. I actually went with our team last week, and we were touring the strategic stockpile just to make sure we had all the supplies, all the everything that our hospitals would need to fight this, and we've got a great supply. They were showing me all of the supplies there to support the hospital. So we're continuing to do that. And I'm just encouraging Oklahomans to, be safe, take care of their health. This affects people differently. Some people can get very sick with it, but this is something that's going through the whole state. The good news that they just shared with me from the Department of Health was there are 4 or 5 states around us that are starting to see their numbers come back down. Maine, where Omicron started, are seeing dramatically come down, way below the peaks of the first 2. And then even Louisiana, a couple other states around us are starting to see the numbers. Florida's coming back down. So we think we're about peaked and coming back down on the other side of it.
These folks who aren't trained in education going to the classroom, what would you say to folks who say they're basically acting as babysitters in the schools?
Well, I mean, substitute teaching. Number one, we know that the best solution is our wonderful teachers across the state in person teaching young people. Second best thing is substitute teachers. There's wonderful substitute teachers. There's wonderful people from the business community. And so that's the second best thing is we've got to keep our kids in person, keep the school doors open, because there's a whole nother set of consequences when kids are at home. And Chad Warmington talked about these parents are still having to go to work, and these kids are left by themselves at home. So I would much rather have them in the classroom, and I think most parents agree with me.
Back on 2 hours ago, the state hospital leaders, or the OKC hospital leaders, had a press conference talking about the backup in their emergency departments. And they've got, I think, a combined 117 patients who are waiting for an ICU or ER bed and can't get in it. They're saying that their employees, nurses, doctors, they also have infections, they have family members who are sick, they're strained. Early in the pandemic, you declared a state of emergency, and there was some flexibility given, there was some implementation of some things, hospital search plans, things that we're not hearing about any further. I asked the hospital CMOs whether they were thinking about asking for a 2-week state of emergency, either from the city or Oklahoma City or from you. Thoughts on, is there any benefit to that? Is that something that's on your radar, or did you figure out things that you don't need to have that added authority and flexibility?
Well, obviously, I'm briefed all the time. If the hospitals need anything, we're going to do everything we can to supply what they need. ICU numbers right now are around 270 across the state of Oklahoma. The peak number was over 400 in January. And again, out of that 270, about 40 to 45% of those are there with COVID, not because of COVID. We can track those numbers now. So if there are things that we can waive, if there's bureaucracy, if there's things that the hospitals need, we'll absolutely look at those. I have not heard of those. We've heard about some staffing, non-medical staffing needs. So our Department of Health was just briefing me that they were connecting them with some of the personnel services across the state to provide some of those non-medical needs. So that's one option that I know that they're looking at. The backup option ultimately would be bringing in the National Guard to help with the hospitals. I don't think we're at that point yet. Again, those numbers are not where they were even back in January. We're very sensitive. We talk about it every single day. We're working on it. We want to give our hospitals everything that they need. But the big picture that everybody needs to understand and think about is every single state, regardless of their policies, is having a third spike that's considerably bigger than the first two. Omicron is a new variant. We have 3 million vaccinations administered in the state of Oklahoma right now, about 2.9 million exactly. And 75% of the people in the hospital are unvaccinated. We're still encouraging that. We're transparent with all of our data. But we're also seeing now 43% of the new positive cases are from vaccinated individuals. But we think that's also attributing and keeping people out of the hospital, and plus the fact that Omicron doesn't seem to be as dangerous as Delta and the original coronavirus, which is really, really good news for us.
Sorry. So if the hospital leaders were to request from you an emergency declaration for specific reasons, you would weigh that, and you would.
Well, there's a difference between waiving a bureaucratic policy or declaring an emergency in the state of Oklahoma. So we would give them everything they need to waive any kind of bureaucracy or hindrance to them take care of patients. So that would be our commitment.
Consulted with or talked with school administrators on how to manage how they're going to work, having a bunch of strange people in and out of their schools. It's a specialized skill to manage a bunch of children in a classroom. Is there any kind of training to help people come in from off the street?
Yeah, I mean, our Secretary of Education is a public school teacher, and he actually just substituted. Why don't you give her an update on how that all works?
Yes, I've been on the phone and met with administrators for the past week. They're all very excited to have the opportunity to have personnel come into their school. To your point, most schools have some sort of onboarding and help folks that are coming in from off the street to come sub. And again, we have to have a background check, and we're working to make sure that is as speed line as possible so that they can get inside the schools. And the second part is the school helping onboard these volunteers as they come in. And most schools do a great job of providing supports. And again, these aren't people that are coming in to be a full replacement for a teacher. These are people that are coming in volunteering to help monitor classes, help continue with a lesson plan that a teacher's provided for them. So again, they'll be able to step in with assistance from the schools and be able to continue that learning process.
Education that I want to talk about. We see stories on a regular basis of people who pass background checks and be employed at schools who are prosecuted for having sexual misconduct or sexual relationships with students. So as you talk about bringing people in, state employees who may never interact with a child or a teenager, people from the private sector who may not have gone through that, is there any consideration or guidance or training or additional emphasis on what not to do when a 15-year-old walks up to you and puts their hand on your shoulder in a way that's awkward?
So you absolutely have to take that very seriously of any kind of misconduct inside a school. Obviously, that is the top concern of our student safety inside the school. These background checks that are done are not only just the typical background check, they also have the fingerprint background check as well, which that allows the school to maintain any type of understanding of if there was to be a run-in with law enforcement anytime when this individual is in and working with the school. And the second part is, yes, sir, I think that this is what schools, as somebody comes on board, there's clear expectations of what's expected from a sub and how they behave.
This executive order, how will it impact staffing shortages that are already happening in other state agencies?
So right now, at least with the top 10 agencies that support most of the government's functions and budget, we're not seeing that. We're not seeing massive shortages. We've had Omicron come through. We've had some timeliness in terms of, whether we were at full capacity or not, but for the most part we are. And that's what's making this available to us now. So the state of Oklahoma, at least for those agencies that support the majority of our citizens, isn't suffering from a crisis of not having workers.
According to their own personal skill, or are they going to be paid? What is the number being paid?
Yeah, they'll be paid. So the governor's made it available for them to go off and do the job, but they're not going to be taking sub pay. They'll be paid by the state just as they normally would. So that's funds that the schools should be able to use to pay other substitutes or other resources that they need as they need. That's correct. That's exactly correct. Just as it was during COVID in March of 20 and during the summer of that same year. I don't think that's a policy that I'm willing to speak about because this chief operating officer, but it's not one that I'm asking for.
Governor, you mentioned the National Guard as a possibility of going to hospitals. Would you ever consider sending the National Guard in to keep schools open?
Well, no, we haven't considered doing that. The National Guard would be used for if there was any kind of like we were administering vaccines across the state early on. We're delivering PPE across the state. So if there was a shortage or a need for the National Guard, that's one thing. The substitute teaching piece, we have not considered the National Guard for that now.
They're not being required to be vaccinated, but would you say to parents who are maybe concerned that just bringing more people on campus might only further the spread of COVID cases?
Yeah, I don't think any teacher's required to be vaccinated today, so I don't think that would change for a substitute teacher.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.